All right, well, we will go ahead and jump right in. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Reineman. I'm the St. Johns River Keeper, and welcome to our third Watershed Watch Chat. This is an opportunity for us to formally share some of the great work of our partners, as well as the things we're doing collaboratively speaking, and also talk about special events coming up, specifically in the Middle Basin of the St. Johns. Today, we're happy to welcome Friends of the Wekiva River, Inc. We have three great board members, and we're going to be talking about news from the Wekiva River. The Wekiva is a very important tributary to the St. Johns. And of course, the St. Johns River is only as healthy as its tributaries. And so we've benefited from the almost 40 years of work that Friends of the Wekiva have been dedicating their skills and their passion and resources to protecting the Wekiva River. Next slide. And so the speakers will be today from St. Johns River Keeper. It'll be me as well as Gabby Melch. Gabby is our Middle Basin coordinator. It's been doing field work along the Little Wekiva and Wekiva River. And we're also proud to have three board members from Friends of the Wekiva: Jay Exum, Mike Clyburn, and Nancy Prime. And we'll be talking a little bit about the Wekiva and why it's so important, some of the continuing threats to the Wekiva River, as well as some things that have come out of the legislative session, some that will help and some that will not. But first, just to introduce our organizations. The St. Johns River Keeper, we've been around for 20 plus years, and our mission is to defend the St. Johns River and advocate for its protection. And not just the St. Johns, but its springs and its tributaries, because our river's only as healthy as all the waterways in its watershed. And we do our work by investigating issues, advocating for good sound water policy, seeking for solutions to challenges, educating and engaging the public, building awareness, and most importantly, activating not only our members, but our partner organizations. Next slide. And now I'll turn over to Nancy to introduce to you all Friends of the Wekiva River. Nancy?
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for including us in your watershed chats. As you can see on the screen, these are our goals for the Wekiva River. Friends of the Wekiva were organized formally in 1982, but a group of individuals started meeting in 1979 because of their concern for construction that was taking place on the east side of the Little Wekiva River. This included subdivisions that were going in and without adequate infrastructure to support those activities. And of course, with each of these new developments, there was a package sewage plant that was sending water into the Little Wekiva and into the Wekiva River. Our mission is to promote and protect the aesthetic and recreation values of the system, to protect the integrity of the basin, and to work toward restoration and continuation of the river and its tributaries. And of course, the all-important element of education. The Friends began meeting formally in 1982, as I said, and that organization began as 19 individuals who were dedicated to protecting that resource. An interesting group of people. The founder, Russ Fisher, was a retired colonel, and he had a cottage, he and his wife had a cottage on the Little Wekiva River. Several of the individuals were doing work on the Wekiva at that time, and of course were interested. And of course, residents along the Little Wekiva and the Big were concerned about what might happen. The Friends of the Wekiva worked toward the establishment of the Wekiva as a wild and scenic river in the late 1980s. However, in the early 1980s, they worked toward designating the Wekiva River as as an outstanding Florida water. The Friends developed a paper outlining, a white paper outlining the concerns about the Wekiva, and presented that paper to county officials in 3 counties, to the legislators who represented the area, and to the Orlando Sentinel. All of these were very important in the future work of the Friends of the Wekiva. The original concerns were water quality and increased wastewater, and also the concerns for increasing nitrates to the river. It didn't take long before land conservation, habitat protection, water quality, including spring flow and consumptive use, and stormwater issues were addressed by the Friends. And that's a brief early history.
Thank you, Nancy. And just to get everyone's bearings set, if you're not familiar where the section of the Middle St. John's and the Wekiva we're speaking of, you're seeing here the St. John's River. Again, it's a huge watershed. The river begins in Indian River County, there at the bottom of the screen in the middle. Just west of Vero Beach, you see Blue Cypress Lake, which is the first lake of the series of river of lakes that make up the St. John's. It travels 310 miles north. And you see there in the circle area, this is the Middle Basin, and just north of the Sanford area is where the Little Wekiva comes into, meets the St. John's River. We are very fortunate to have the Friends of the Wekiva River organization, because they've truly set the gold standard for getting protections for this magical stretch of water within the Wekiva River Basin. And we benefited because since it's a tributary, all of these protections help protect and protect the St. John's River and all the downstream waters. Jay, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the threats of the day of the Wekiva, as well as just some of the things if someone was out on the water today they would see?
Sure. And I think the next slide may have the tributaries and the watershed. Yeah, so the 3 major tributaries to the Wekiva are Rock Springs Run, Blackwater Creek, and the Little Wekiva River. The Little Wekiva is the one that comes from the most urban source, and there are several springs that feed the Little Wekiva, but it has a lot of surface water in it also. But most notably, the Wekiva Springs Run and Rock Springs Run are fed by 2nd order magnitude springs, Rock Springs and Wekiva Springs. And those 3 tributaries coalesce into the Wekiva River, go downstream about 17 miles, and then have the waters from Blackwater Creek that join them just a couple of miles downstream of the St. John's River. Each one of these tributaries to me is distinctive. The Little Wekiva River has more urban influence, but very quickly you can go from urban areas associated with Altamont Springs to a Blackwater Creek that lies adjacent to conservation lands to the west. The Rock Springs Run, Wekiva Springs, and much of the Wekiva River have most of their flow from spring sources. Therefore, those are the crystal clear waters that you think of when you think about the Rock Springs Run and Wekiva River. And finally, Blackwater Creek to me is the most remote of all the tributaries. It's about 17 miles and it flows through almost entirely protected land owned by the state. There are several large springs that feed it, but most of its water comes from Lake Norris, comes from that area at Lake Norris, flows through swamps, has other springs that feed it, and it's really a remote experience to float down. So that would be the one I would encourage everybody to go to because it's the least visited.
That sounds very exciting. Today is the last day of the Florida legislative session. Some good news coming out of the legislative session is that there is $100 million of state funds that is focusing on Florida Forever priority projects, and an additional $300 million of federal stimulus money that the state is dedicating to Florida Forever and the Florida Wildlife Corridor projects. You're seeing here on this chart, Jay, a lot of conservation land already in place protecting these waterways of the Wekiva River. Are there other properties that are targeted that would be helpful for conservation? And can you talk a little bit about why conservation land is so important to protecting our waterways and springs?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And this is something the Friends of Wekiva River have particularly focused on literally for the last 30 years. But the kinds of things that we're talking about that are threatened by human activities, water quality, water quantity, habitat, those are best protected through the preservation and conservation and management of natural lands adjacent to the river, protecting the springs, assuring water quality, and particularly assuring the linkages of wildlife corridors, particularly between Wekiva and the Ocala. I wrote an opinion piece to the paper a few weeks ago and encouraged the legislature to fully fund Florida Forever, which has historically been at $300 million. One of the reasons why I suggested that was because there are 22,000 acres left in the Wekiva to Ocala Greenway that was established as a #1 priority by the state about 20 years ago. 80,000 acres have already been protected, but there's 22,000 acres left. The Wekiva Parkway was built with underpasses to promote wildlife passage under the road and promote this landscape scale ecological linkages. But imagine what would happen if the 22,000 acres that are primarily north of the Wekiva Parkway aren't acquired. So I tried to say in this opinion piece that it affects local areas like ours most significantly, but it really requires the help of the state. So what's happened in the last month of the legislature to get $100 million for Florida Forever, and then $300 million for targeted projects that would include the Wekiva to Ocala Greenway. We are very optimistic that we can target some of that land for purchasing conservation easements in the Greenway and shoring up some of the 22,000 acres that are left to be acquired. It's very important for the long-term value of this essentially 100,000 acre stretch of natural land surrounded by a lot of urban growth.
Well, and again, this would provide a really meaningful and significant buffer for the St. Johns River as well. And so we are optimistic. We're not at the final hours of the legislative session, but it sounds like that this could actually be the most funding towards this conservation buying program I think I've ever seen at one time. So we're really excited about that and look forward to the ringing of the bell at the end of the day and this getting across the finish line. So thank you, Jay and Friends of Wekiva, for your work on securing this funding. Unfortunately, there is some bad news coming out of the legislative session as well. And Mike, I know one of the things that you and I have been working on is the Central Florida Water Initiative. And there was a weakening of the rule in this legislative session. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the Central Florida Water Initiative. Just give a little summary of what it is for folks on the line today that may not be as familiar with this as we are.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. The Central Florida Water Initiative is an effort to prepare a regional plan for meeting the water supply needs of Central Florida. And for this study, Central Florida includes all of Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County, and all of Polk County, plus the southern part of Lake County. And there are 3 water management districts involved in this effort, and they're cooperating in developing this plan. And this will be the second iteration of the plan. The effort's been going on now for over 10 years. And in November 2020, the water management districts adopted the 2020 Regional Water Supply Plan. And Friends of the Wekiva River have been following this development closely because of the potential impacts on the springs and the river. Could I have the next slide, please? This 2020 plan determined that by 2040, the groundwater withdrawals would exceed 850 million gallons a day. The plan also involved developing a detailed computer model of the Florida aquifer, and that model estimated that no more than 760 million gallons a day of water should be taken out of the Florida aquifer. Now, the model looked at the total Florida aquifer, upper and lower, and they the study also demonstrated or documented that the water management districts have already allocated over 1 billion gallons a day of water through the consumptive use permits. So they've over allocated the available water by about 40%. And the impacts of this are on the Wekiva. The immediate impacts are on potential reductions in flow into the Wekiva River and Wekiva Springs. The plan projected that if demands and withdrawals from the aquifer proceeded as projected, that by 2026 and 2027, the Wekiva Springs and Wekiva River would drop below their established minimum flows. So this is, of course, a big concern to us. So in response to this plan that the Water Management District developed, DEP proposed a rule that would allow the districts to provide letter modifications to existing consumptive use permits that would reduce the permits, the allocations to the 2025 demands. Unfortunately, this rule only focused on the upper Florida aquifer. It did not address the lower Florida aquifer, which is inconsistent with the regional water supply plan. And when we brought that to their attention, they said, "Well, this is just a first step. You know, we'll look at the lower Florida later." But just so everybody's aware, the districts have been actively encouraging utilities to change their withdrawals from the upper to the lower Florida, which could ultimately still have an impact on the Wekiva River and Wekiva Springs and the other streams and springs in the area. So now, even though the utilities have been actively involved in developing this water supply plan, they've been consulted all along. They've had active involvement in the committees that put the plan together. They filed a challenge to the plan, to the rule, in I believe it was February of this year. And as a result of the challenge, DEP further weakened the rule. Instead of allowing the permits to be modified by letter modifications, now the water management districts will be required to prove that each individual user is having an adverse impact on either another user or the water resources of the state. And this is a very difficult thing to do. It's kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts. It's hard to tell which cut caused the death. And that's exactly the case here. You can show the cumulative effect of all the withdrawals, but it's very difficult to determine the individual impact of a single withdrawal. So this puts the water management districts in a very difficult place. We expect there's going to be litigation coming out of this between the districts and the public utilities over how much water they can withdraw. And we think it's just another case of the can being kicked down the road for somebody else to solve later.
Well, and Mike, thank you so much for that overview. And the bottom line is, by our drinking water source in this area is the same freshwater source for Wekiva Springs and Wekiva River. And so as we're overusing our aquifer, which this continues to allow, you'll see a reduction of spring flow. That means a reduction of freshwater flow in the St. Johns River, leading to more saltwater intrusion. And so it is about cumulative impacts that unfortunately now will be hard, that utilities will not have to address. And so we will continue to work on this diligently, because this is something that is setting up for long-term damage, and will not address that damage till it's past the tipping point. We will come back and talk about growth a little bit more in a minute in the Q&A, because we're very fortunate to have Paul Owens from 1,000 Friends on today. So we'll come back to growth in a minute. But next, let's talk a little bit about another bit of good news from the legislature before we get to some of the more bad bills that are out. One of the issues that we've been working on collectively with the Friends of Wekiva, as well as Gabby Melch in our Middle Basin, is some erosion issues on the Little Wekiva River. So Gabby, you want to give an update on what you're seeing out in the field on the Little Wekiva?
Yes, thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. The Little Wekiva River, as Jay explained, is a highly urbanized upper reaches of it, and it comes really from the city of Orlando. It's about 14 miles long, and it also, until it gets to the Springs neighborhood in Longwood, it becomes the Wild and Scenic River section, or hope to be. It actually passes through 15 different lakes on its journey, and ultimately the St. Johns River. A plan for restoration is in the works at this time. You can change. Next slide. This aerial is of the ultimate I-4, and it shows the close proximity to the Little Wekiva River and the potential there that erosion during construction over the last several years has been responsible in part for some of the sedimentation in the Little Wekiva River, and we're working through that with all the partners. Next slide. This is one of the outfalls for the construction sites, and sand is present there at different times, and you can see a little swath of the river here. Go ahead. Next slide. And this is a good picture that really shows you the before and the after. And this is the one on the left is the erosion and sediment has even gotten higher since then. But you can see on the right, one of the homeowners in front of their dock has experienced a loss of the river, and the river water has disappeared. And what would you like to add to that, anyone from the Friends of the Wekiva River group?
I might just add, Gabby, that this issue has become such a significant issue to navigation of the Little Wekiva that with the homeowners in the area, the Friends of Wekiva River have been working with state legislators to try to not only identify the source of sediments, but develop a plan to rectify the situation. And so we've been working with Senator Jason Broder's office, who has promoted legislation to do two things. First, to study the source of the sediment, and not just to identify where it came from, but to identify where it came from, potentially deal with any violations that might have been the cause of the sedimentation, and develop options for mitigation and remediation. Since we know the sediments have got to be removed, we also want to make sure that remediation can begin before that study is completed. So the legislature has committed, we think it's going to be finalized, $250,000 to a project that Seminole County has been leading that will be well over $1 million to remove the sediments in about a half-mile stretch of the river. So what we think is there's going to be a long-term assessment of where these sediments are coming from, and a solution to stop the sedimentation. And in the short term, a strategy for removing them, restoring significant patches of invasive exotic plants, and getting the Little Wekiva River's navigable waterway back to where it was a few years ago. So we're hoping that the legislature has partnered in a way that's going to help us achieve that in the relatively near future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Gabby. And I think all of these issues we talked about today demonstrate how growth can undermine and degrade our natural water systems. Overuse of our aquifer can cause a reduction of spring flow. Construction projects and growth can cause erosion and sedimentation, as well as when you have more development, you have more of a footprint as far as pollution running off of these yards, fertilizers, and urban uses. So one of the things that I know we, as well as Thousand Friends and Friends of the Wekiva and other partners have been saying for years is, not only do we need investment in restoring these waterways and protecting them, we need good water policy. We are fortunate to have Paul Owens from Thousand Friends on the line today. I'm going to ask him to give any updates he would like to share, because he's been keeping his finger on the pulse with his team on the legislative session. And Paul, I'll turn it over to you if there's anything you want to share with our great group we have here today.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity, even though I didn't know it was in the works, but happy to do the best I can. There have been a number of bad bills dealing with growth, unfortunately, that have advanced during this session and look like they're on their way to passage. I'll just focus on a few that would have a particular impact, as you described, particular negative impact on water quality and other natural resources. One is a bill that expands what's considered a small-scale comprehensive plan amendment by 5 times. Under current law, if you have a comprehensive plan amendment that's 10 acres or fewer, you don't need to be subjected to regional or state scrutiny for potential broader impacts from that comp plan amendment. The bill that's on its way to passage now would increase the threshold from 10 acres to 50 acres, or if it's in a so-called rural area of opportunity, it would increase it from 20 acres to 100 acres. Obviously, larger comp plan amendments and the developments that they would clear the way for are much more likely to have impacts, regional impacts. However, if they're below these higher thresholds, they won't get the kind of scrutiny that they're getting now from Water Management District, from the State Department of Economic Opportunity, from the Department of Transportation, from the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, agencies like that. So it's promoting easing the path toward larger developments and growth. And we see that as a very negative development. There is also a bill that's headed toward passage that makes it easier for property owners to challenge land use regulations through the Burt-Harris Act, which is a higher level of property rights protection that we have here in Florida. And what this will do is potentially subject local governments that try to control their land use to more Burt-Harris claims and more potential liability if those claims are decided in favor of the property owners, the developers. And in order to try to avoid that kind of liability, it'll make local governments a lot more tentative in their efforts to control land use and control development. It'll inhibit local governments in trying to control land use and development. So that's also a very negative development, unfortunately. The other one that I'll mention is impact fees. There's a cap on impact fees that has passed through the legislature. And what that means is it'll be harder for local governments to impose the costs of growth on developers. It'll shift the costs to everybody else. And it's another break on development that's being eliminated by the legislature. So those are three bills that could have a major negative impact on putting some kind of restraint and maintaining some kind of control on growth and development.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that update. And Paul, if you don't mind, could you put your website in the chat, just so folks on the webinar can have access to your website?
Sure.
Basin Friends will be doing a wrap-up webinar, and I know you'll have some action alerts, so I'd love to share those with everyone on the webinar. So now I want to open up the floor. Well, I guess, Nancy, is there any any parting thoughts you want to share before we open up the floor for questions?
Lisa, I think it's important that we recognize that those issues that the Friends were gathered together some 40 years ago, those issues are still with us. And we've worked very hard, and other organizations, including Friends and the Riverkeeper and Audubon and other organizations, have worked very hard to protect our natural resources. That means that today we're about where we were 40 years ago, but we can't give up. We need to continue to fight to protect those resources that are so valuable, not only to us as people who enjoy the environment, but an understanding of the fact that these issues continue to prevail, and how important it is to protect those resources, which in fact protect us in the future by providing water and a place that we can relax and understand the real essence of Central Florida.
Thank you, Nancy. I had the opportunity to relax on the banks of the Wekiva with my 12-year-old recently, and it is like going back in time, you know, with all the benefit of the beautiful conservation land around it. So thank you all for your work and your time today. And now I want to open up the floor to questions, or if anyone wants to raise any issues that we may not have brought up that's on your mind today. I did see a question from Jim about some construction. And Jim, I know Mike was asking what, if you know more about that development.
I know what he's talking about, Lisa.
Okay, thanks, Jay.
At least I think I do, Jim. You're talking about the Princeton and Silver Star, the big Walmart that was there, and there was a long, heated discussion during permitting about whether or not the wetland impacts were should have been permitted, and its effect on the Little Wekiva River, because that development, and there's a tremendous amount of exposed soil associated with some big box development there. It is, in fact, right at the southern end of the headwaters of the Little Wekiva, and it goes into Lake Lawn, or it goes into the canal and the wetland systems associated with Lake Lawn that are right at the southern end of the watershed. So Jim's question, if I think I got everything in that chat question, is certainly valid. It is, there are a lot of exposed soils there. We don't have any knowledge as of now that there were any violations of sediment control associated with that construction, but it's possible that some of those sands have leached into the system, or flowed into the system, I should say. My bet is it's not what is showing up in the stretch of the Little Wekiva River that we were talking about yet, because it's so far downstream. But literally, after a major storm event or a year or two from now, we may find that those soils, those sediments that may have run off of those sites do make it down there. That's one of the reasons why this study is so important. So every large scale development like that should be looked at in this project review, even one as far down in the urban areas as Princeton and Silver Star. Jim, I don't know if does that answer your question? We know of nothing specific yet. It's certainly, it would be very, I don't think there's a possibility that that's causing the sedimentation in the stretch that we referred to today, and it ought to be a part of the study funded by the legislature.
And excuse me, but I know that there's been a lot of armoring of the banks in that upper reaches there, all the way from Lake Lotus and up in that area. And they have actually constructed gabions and removed homes. And there's been some other erosion that's happened during the past. And I know the city of Altamont Springs has several erosion protection projects that they've been working on as well, which is getting closer to the actual place in the Little Wekiva where they're seeing this sedimentation as well. So that's a lot of things going on in that basin. So that study should certainly be good. Thank you.
Shannon, are there other questions?
Yes, sorry, I had an airplane going overhead, so I was attempting to hope that it went by before I came back on. But so this one's for you, Gabby, Nancy, Jay, Mike, all the panelists today. It's really about the next steps in all of this, you know, the next steps for the Wekiva, the next for the St. John's, and sort of what do you guys see on the horizon in terms of taking action?
Well, I know in the past, all the municipal governments met together probably quarterly to discuss different restoration and work that needed to be done on the river. It's my hope that that will occur in the future again. And I think they're all starting to coordinate again and have those quarterly meetings to discuss the issues of the Little Wekiva.
I'll chime in relative to the CFWI. Friends of the Wekiva is talking to some of the major utilities and urging them to respect the findings of the Regional Water Supply Master Plan and limit their groundwater withdrawals from the upper and lower Florida to their 2025 demands. That's one step that can be taken. We think there also needs to be continuing watch over the permits that the Water Management District is issuing. And we plan to comment on those that we think could have an adverse impact on the Wekiva and the springs in the area. So that's another action item that we have undertaken.
Another action item is that Friends of the Wekiva, along with Seminole Audubon, Orange Audubon, and the lower Ocklawaha Audubon, are all trying to follow up on any plans that are being presented to the county governments and local governments that will be harm to our resources in the area.
And I'll just add, because we talked about several different topics, and really it boils down to the three issues that Nancy mentioned at the beginning: water quality, water quantity, and habitat protection. But those 22,000 acres of conservation lands that were identified by the Florida Forever Project 20 years ago in the Wekiva to Ocala Greenway, to me, those are critical to assure that they're either acquired fee simple or conservation easement. And that's going to be a multi-year project, because there's so many landowners in those 22,000 acres. So vigilance about what affects water quality and water quantity, and a sustained effort to make sure that those in charge of land acquisition stay focused on the Wekiva to Ocala Greenway.
And I just chime in one more time. We didn't really talk about the BMAP, but one of the Basin Management Action Plan is to improve water quality. One of the action items that the Friends has undertaken is we're compiling a list of projects that the local governments and other entities have completed that are supposed to be removing nutrients from the Wekiva, from the groundwater that feeds the springs. We've hired an intern, or we are using an intern at Valencia College to compile this. And what we're hoping to do is basically hold the local governments accountable for implementing the projects that they said they would do in the BMAP.
Well, good luck with that. If you make that happen, you let us know how you got it done, and then we're going to do it for every other tributary in the state of Florida, right? Because we all need some BMAP help and some real action. This next question is from Mr. Kendall, and he's asking about the new preemption regulation that was just put in by the state, and whether or not you, into our panelists, believe that it will impact the Orange County voter amendment, which I'm guessing is the rights of nature, but I'm just I'm reading into it. It didn't say that.
I think I can take that one. That's one of those things that maybe wait and see.
Mm-hmm.
We were very pleased when Orange County government took steps earlier this year to try to avoid this particular legislative action. That's still up for question as to whether or not, or what that impact will be. As far as the rights of the river, we need to continue to track that and to be sure that, if possible, the rights for the Wekiva and the Yukon River are protected. Both of those, of course, are tributaries to the St. Johns River. We don't have an answer, Sam, but we're working on it.
Hopefully we don't have to wait and see it play out in the courts, but that may be the case. I don't have any other questions from the chat window, but I'd like to invite anyone else on the call today to ask questions about the Wekiva, or anything else that you have burning questions about to our panelists. You're welcome to unmute yourself and speak up if you have anything.
If not, I'll ask one question for each of the panelists. For everyone on the webinar today, or that may be watching it in the future, what's one thing that they can do to help protect the Wekiva River, our springs in the St. Johns? And Nancy, I'll start with you.
Conserve water. That's the one thing that everyone can do. We're now using reclaimed water for a lot of irrigation, but we still have 51% of our water, potable water, being used for irrigation. Let's get over that. Let's recognize the importance of conserving our water so that we can all have water in the future.
Absolutely. Jay?
Well, I'll give this answer at two scales, I guess. The second would be careful about the use of fertilizers. So if we're talking about individual actions, really, we talked about water quality and water quantity, and that's from over consumption, and much of the problem with pollution in the springs and surface waters is because of residential fertilizer. So I'll just say, be careful about the use of fertilizer. Everybody on this call is probably preaching to the choir, but everybody on this call can find the specifics about what that means to them. And then at the maybe, how do you leverage your influence at that scale? I would say get involved either with the riverkeeper and find out through Lisa and her organization how you might influence others, or I would encourage you to join the Friends of the Wekiva River and let us help put you into things that we've got going on that meet your passions, your energy, and your skill set, because we could always use more people involved. This year has been particularly necessary because we have actually engaged with the legislators in a more substantive way than in most years. And I think that's going to be the trend going forward. So for those that want to get involved, reach out to us at the Friends of the Wekiva River or St. John's Riverkeeper and find a way to leverage your influence and your passion about these natural resources.
Thanks, Jay. And Shannon just put their website in the chat. And so you can go to friendsofwekiva.org. So that's in the chat. Mike, what would you like to ask everyone to do?
Well, I think we can each be an advocate to our local county commissioner or city commissioner and ask them to support measures that would conserve water and reduce fertilizers or other pollutants that are affecting the springs and the aquifer. You know, we have gotten involved in that by, as Jay was saying, talking to the legislatures, but a lot of the action happens at the local level. And so our city and county commissioners need to hear from us.
Thanks, Mike. And Gabby?
Well, from a master gardening kind of standpoint, I would suggest that we do low impact landscaping with little inputs, you know, reduce your fertilizer and your pesticide usage, your herbicide usage, and some of your fungicides, and don't have that high expectation of having the perfect green lawn. And I really feel like homeowners associations, we really need to get people who live in them to work with the HOA folks to understand better how the aesthetic of our yard is really great, but it could be really wrecking our drinking water. And so we really need to protect our drinking water. And I have a private utility that I get water from and do our wastewater. And we really have to encourage them to invest in the infrastructure of all wastewater treatment plants to stop the discharges of in wet water times and just different accidents. So there's a lot to be done, you guys. Please get out there and do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. And just a couple things from the chat. Harmony said, count me in for volunteering. Thank you for that. Also, Cindy said she's the co-admin on the Seminole County Smart Development Coalition on Facebook. So everyone in Seminole County, check that out. And also, I know we are talking with Thousand Friends and others about doing some more collaborative work to address these issues. Would love to work further with Friends of the Wekiva because we all have so much to lose, but also so much to gain if we put our energy and our expertise working collaboratively to protect these waterways. So any more questions, Shannon, or do you want to get on to the special announcements?
No, I would just say, folks, mark your calendar for our next Watershed Watch on May 28th. And Lisa, I'll turn it over.
And on May 28th, if anyone has any topics y'all would like for us to feature on this special webinar chat, we're looking for new opportunities. So let us know. You can email Lisa at stjohnsriverkeeper.org. And I do want to give a shout out to the legacy of Bill Belleville. Florida Waters lost a true river champion and springs champion and hero last year with the passing of Bill Belleville, who's contributed so much to Friends of the Wekiva, as well as St. John's Riverkeeper through his work, through his passion, through his writing, through his films. And a small group of us gathered this past weekend on the banks of the Wekiva to honor Bill and his legacy. We'd hoped to do something much larger, but with COVID, we wanted to do what we could now and honor him, but also look forward to doing something on an annual basis. It's a great reason to get together to remember Bill's passion and his work, but also just to get us together to make sure that we're continuing to protect these natural waterways that Bill contributed to his life to. So just wanted to say a couple words about Bill. Shannon put his website in the chat too. If you haven't read or seen his films or experienced his work, please, his words live on. And so please explore the work of Bill Belleville. And then I want to turn over to Gabby with a special event she wants to invite you all to.
Yes, thank you. So put on your calendars, May 13th, we're going to be doing a program with the Volusia County Water Alliance, our symposium on our water and our future. It'll be at 6 p.m. and it'll be on Zoom, as well as it'll be on the Facebook Live. And if you can't attend at that time, we will be having it taped, and it'll be on the West Volusia Audubon website as well. And our topic of the day, of course, is going to be myself talking about paddling on the river and all the good stuff and why we need to protect it. And we'll also be working with the Public Works Director from the City of DeLand to talk about some of the exciting things and some of the work and the support that they need to keep our water supply safe and protect the environment. So check us out.
All right. Thank you, Gabby, for all of your work in the Middle Basin. Thank you, Nancy, Jay, and Mike, for all of the fantastic work you and your colleagues have been doing for decades on the Friends of the Wekiva. Paul, thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot and getting up-to-date update from what's happening in Tallahassee. And most importantly, thank all of you for tuning in today. For us spending time just talking about things, working on how we can better collaborate and give our waterways a voice. This is what we will do and can do by working together, by having all of you engaged to make sure we're giving our waterways a voice for today as well as future generations. So thank you for tuning in. Mark your calendars for May 28th for our next Watershed Watch chat, and hope to see you out on the water soon. Have a great Friday.